As you said, my name is Ronan Shields. I'm the digital editor at The Drum. We're primarily a UK-based title, but yes, we are looking to come over here to the US. And we cover the digital marketing sector in the whole. My specific area of coverage is programmatic and sort of very data-led advertising. So this is what brings us to this panel where we're talking about the hunt for the perfect impression, which is a very wide-ranging thing, but don't worry, we'll narrow that conversation down. Beside me, I have Mr. John Snyder. He's the CEO of Grapeshot. And we've got Jonah Goodart. He's the CEO of Moat. Thank you for joining us. I was just wondering if we could just start with a very quick elevator pitch about what you guys do, so nothing too long. John, could you tell us a little bit about what Grapeshot does?
Okay, so Grapeshot is the sort of Google AdWords technology that's available to all platforms that aren't Google. So we help people choose what to buy by investigating the keywords on the pages before they buy it in programmatic, and then secondly, understand campaigns by looking at the context correlated to the clicks or the conversions or other metrics.
Sure, okay.
Jonah. I'm Jonah Goodart, CEO of Moat. First of all, thank you to the MLA and Dan for having me here. Moat is a measurement and analytics company. We basically help marketers and publishers measure what we call attention. And the core thesis of Moat is that the scarce resource that we all deal in is attention, and it's what every marketer wants and needs. And so measuring attention ultimately is the path to success in digital or frankly in any medium.
Okay, great. Just going back to the title of this session, The Hunt for the Perfect Impression, you guys mentioned about intention, engagement, user awareness, but looking for the sort of the preamble of what was on the website about this thing is that how this industry has so far been very focused on getting the right user at the right price, which is kind of, it's interesting that the industry is set up in such a way that getting people at the right price, it's all about efficiencies. But as was said in many of the earlier sessions, a lot of advertising sucks. How did we get to this place?
Well, I just remember a great set of parties on Jonah's boat at Cannes. And I think Cannes is one of those places where everyone gets together, and I think a few of us were just gathered and we felt, well, the quest for the perfect impression was really saying we're not doing it. I mean, the rise of ad blockers shows we're not doing it. Essentially, I think a lot of brand spend coming to programmatic is looking for a slightly different type of engagement with the consumer. So we're not chasing down the performance metrics. We're trying to tell a story. And I think it's really important that we understand what that brand spend wants, and we try and, as it were, do great storytelling in programmatic.
So would you say thus far it's been the industry's focused on performance, and kind of where digital advertising, where it first sprang from? Do you think that's kind of got us to where we're kind of measuring the wrong things? We want digital advertising to essentially perform a different task than the marketing.
Well, I think the fantastic thing is that there's some very advanced technologies. So, for example, Jonah's work in Moat is really thinking about the engagement, and I think we heard Corey earlier talking about how ideal it is to piece all these devices together so we can cyber stalk you even more and more and more. And gentlemen talking about personalization. Well, in fact, getting a really relevant context for ad is just as important. We've done it for 50 plus years in print magazines and the like, and this is what the brands know. And I think we have to get the right relevant context. Yes, location is a really exciting dimension for mobile as well, but it is actually about the hover rate, the dwell time, the view time. It's a real consumer, not a robot. There's a whole dimension of saying this is a consumer and they engaged and they had a great creative story being told to them as they saw something. And obviously for mobile, less is more. So we have to go for that quest for the perfect impression.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, I guess what I would just add to that, so 13 years ago I was part of the creation of a company called Right Media. Right Media was the first ad exchange, ended up building a pretty big marketplace for trading programmatic inventory, and we sold a really basic idea, right person, right time, right message. We were wrong. We were wrong because the idea of getting the right person, right time, right message without the other elements of things like context, without effective storytelling, is meaningless, is valueless. And so I think the conclusion that we came to, and part of the reason we started Moat, was because we looked at the really basic numbers of how marketers reach people. And turns out today, 2015, 93% of all retail transactions still come offline. Think about that, 93%. Everything's digital, mobile first. Mobile was 3 years ago. Yeah, I agree. 93% of all transactions still come offline. And so marketers like Procter & Gamble and Nike and Unilever and Kellogg's and others have to ask a different question about effectiveness. And at the end of the day, that's what the conversation is shifting to. And so I think the question around the perfect impression means we have to ask questions about content and context, and we have to ask questions about effectiveness. Otherwise, the whole exchange is valueless.
Well, to your point, John, you mentioned Corey's presentation. He's kind of just gone out the door, so just to play devil's advocate there, obviously we're talking about taking all the pieces of data together so they can get one customer view. And you guys have been talking about this very focus on metrics, et cetera, click-through rates. But you speak to a lot of people and they say, well, it just kind of works. If I'm a marketer and I'm at P&G or Unilever or whatever, you got all these seats and you can make it makes sense to your boss when you present it to them. So would you say that a lot of people, there is no incentive to change because this just kind of works? Okay, it's not perfect, but then whatever is perfect.
I suppose if you want a more...
So I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Well, I went and spoke to Corey behind
right.
and challenged him head on.
Things, but
it was an interesting conversation. I think, the sort of if you want frequency and you want reach, you kind of want to know how many uniques are out there.
Yeah.
But actually, at the end of the day, talking to Jonah's point, if you're a CPG brand and a lot of sort of conversions are actually happening in store, you actually want to engage with them and you want to measure them. So you kind of do want to know a user identity. But I think context has been left out of the equation totally. Yeah. And I think again, against what Corey said, I think native advertising and content marketing are, as it were, maneuvers away from the ad blockers, but also trying to tell a story within an ad. I mean, I was talking to one publisher who was very keen to have a Heineken ad, also including the latest soccer stories, actually in as part of the creative. And I think a consumer wants to be entertained, and I think the dilemma for mobile is, if I get an ad and I'm in the middle of task orientated, I need to get something quickly on my mobile, anything in the way is wasting seconds. And there's other times when I'm waiting for a subway where I'm kind of leaning back, I kind of want to be entertained. And I think there's a lot more significant work to go into context, time of day and location and the like, than saying I am just targeting you across your desktop and your multiple devices. So I think there's a whole load more to really understand what value is for that brand advertiser.
Sure. And I guess to your point, Johnny, you mentioned that you used to work for Right Media Exchange and how the metrics were wrong, etc. But what you may have said, okay, we were wrong at that time, that company still made a lot of money. I mean, it still sold for a lot.
There's not necessarily a correlation between those two things.
Really? Interesting. Okay. Well, guys, so yes, we've been very focused on data-led and conversion-led advertising. As I said, the creative's gone wrong for that and suffered a lot for it. How do we change these conversations then? How do we start asking the right questions? What part of the industry has to start really engineering this turnaround?
Well, I mean, we're on stage. Grapeshot and Moat have started to do some work together, and I feel it's interesting because it's been publishers who have actually tied our types of data together and said this is valuable. So let's say a publisher in London is actually running campaigns and saying, gosh, this campaign for IBM or whoever, I'm getting really good hover time or dwell time here, and I'm getting it's in this type of context. So I'm now going to optimize my campaigns and traffic all these impressions and basically make sure I'm putting the right creative in with the right context to get that right engagement. So, and again, Zaxxer, which is a big buying desk for WPP, again, sort of joining us together and saying, it's beyond saying where are the blacklisted websites where there's all this fraud. It's more about inside the New York Times or all these other sort of premium sites, where am I actually getting the value for my buying? And it's now being measured in things like the dwell time, the hover rate, and which contexts are working. And then I'll go back and optimize and make sure I'll get more of those types of audiences reading that type of context to make sure that my story is properly told. So I see actually it's not us technologists, but it's actually the publishers and the buyers who are already starting to work this out.
Yeah. Would you say it's more coming from the buy side or the sell side?
I think publishers are sort of slowly coming out and actually grasping the fact that if they can sort of paint themselves as having real human non-robot traffic, they very much premium. I think rather than articulating, I've got a wonderful first-party audience, but it's kind of this small, I think it's about, I've got really relevant context, engagement, and your story can be told very well on my pages.
Well, jumping in for a second, one thing behind the question around direct response is I think, why now? Why are we talking about ad blocking? Why are we talking about context? Why are we talking about viewability? Why are we talking about ad fraud? Why are those topics suddenly so important now? Why weren't they 3 years ago or 5 years ago? Did it just start? Is this the first time we've had ad fraud? Is this the first time that there have been issues with viewability? The easy answer is no. What happened is historically, digital has been a direct response medium. And if you're measuring success based on a transaction, based on I spent money, this either did or did not turn into something definitive that made me money, it's a much easier decision. But as brands began to invest more in digital over the last 5 years specifically, it's led to questions about, well, if I don't know whether or not you're going to buy a beer in the end of the day based on the fact that I show you this ad, I have to know a lot more about what happened when I showed you the ad. I need to know that it was there. I need to know how long it was there. I need to know in what context it was there. I need to know everything I can about that experience, because in the end of the day, that becomes a proxy for a KPI. And we're going to be a long ways from understanding that you were shown an ad for a beer, and then later on that night at a pub, you bought that beer. That's going to take a while to get there. And so we will, I think, by the way, get to that point eventually. But we're 5 years away from that, in my opinion. And so we have to ask questions about context. We have to ask questions about user experience. And over time, we're going to get smarter at measuring effectiveness. If the world was completely direct response, a lot of these things wouldn't be quite as much of an issue, right? As somebody said, bots don't buy things. You don't buy things on eBay with a real address if you're a robot. And so I think part of this is about marketers saying we need to figure out digital. We need to invest in digital because it's where all of us consumers are living our lives. And as a result, these questions have begun to come up. And so I think the key is to ask, what's the goal for the marketer, and how do we match that goal with the right signals?
Okay. You've just been very brave there. You said in 5 years' time, we're actually going to be at a place. I don't know anybody that would be brave enough to do that on stage, actually. But to that point, what has to happen within that 5 years for us to get to, well, like I said, there's no such thing as perfect, but better engagement, better impressions?
Well, I mean, I think the things that Corey talked about and some of the other speakers, Factual, et cetera, I think those types of technologies are going to get better. I think we're already starting to see, I went to get an Uber this morning for my wife who was taking our kids to school, and it said, oh, do you want to put in this destination address that you usually put in at this time? So things are getting, it was our kids' school, things like that are getting smarter, they're getting location aware, they're getting time aware, and I think it's a question of literally just that, time, until we get to a place where we have truly better outcome-oriented signals. As part of that process, though, the story that the brand tells is always going to be important. The context that the brand tells it in is always going to be important. I'll give you an example on context. Think about something that you're in the market for, if anything. Anything from a watch, to a shirt, to a restaurant reservation, to a flight. If somebody approaches you at the wrong time with exactly the thing you're in market for, you're not interested. Context matters. You don't want someone to walk up to you during dinner and try to sell you a car, even if you're very interested in buying a car. Context matters. In fact, context is just like the ad being viewable. If it's the wrong context, nothing else matters. And so we have to start with, is it the right context? Of course, is it there? Of course, is it not a bot? But then we have to ask questions about, did I effectively tell a story? Did I engage you? Did I excite you? And at the end of the day, that's what brand building is about.
So, well, I'm a sort of recent newcomer to things like Uber, but all your payment details are stored, and I think some of the devices like Apple Pay, whether it's on your watch or your mobile, I think the ultimate attribution is when a lot more products aren't bought, in sort of normal cash or the very old-fashioned American way of buying things in shops. Essentially, it will be right through the mobile device. So I think there is a nirvana of full attribution if the mobile device is certainly part of the payment and the sort of transaction capture device as well. So I can see that coming. It might not be 5 years, but I think that revolution where that mobile device really is the way you pay for your Uber it will actually be the way you pay for your pint of beer as well, perhaps in the bar. I'm sure Apple hope that.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do. Okay, so what kind of metrics are we going to be talking about? We're not going to be talking about CPMs and CPCs in 5 years time, because then that's a whole other headache. It's like, okay, we're going to have to get a new engagement standard, a new metric. Everybody's going to have to agree. IAB Council is going to have to be called a task force, et cetera, and you just go right back to square one. And then some new technology is going to come on board and, you know, possibly disrupt things again, which kind of makes this an interesting industry to work in. But in 5 years' time, what kind of metrics are marketers going to be looking at and saying, okay, that made this effective?
Well, let's start with something that I don't think is going to change anytime soon, which is there's currently 24 hours in a day. We haven't innovated past that, number one. We all have a certain amount of time that we sleep. If you have little kids, you might sleep a little bit less, like I do. But we all sleep roughly the same amount of time every night. And we all have some amount of time that we spend in front of a screen. We have a limited amount of time and therefore attention. And what we do with that time and attention ultimately impacts the decisions that we make in our lives. The decisions that we make about what we buy, how we spend our time, what we do with our family. And so that's not going to change. Our time and our attention is a limited, very, very scarce commodity. And so what every brand is after is the right piece of that time and attention, the effective piece of that time and attention. And so all metrics will come back to that at some very basic level, which is we have a limited amount of time and attention, and how do we actually know that we're reaching someone and we're effective.
So what, we're going to be measuring how long is spent hovering over an ad, engaged with an ad?
I think the specific actual metrics that come out of that are going to change over time. So today people ask questions about simply time spent on a page, or what we call active time spent on a page, how long you were actively doing something on a particular mobile browser or on a desktop device. People ask questions about interactivity. Did you actually interact with a brand? For how long did you do it with, et cetera? I think, though, my point is that all of these things stem from the idea of attention, and I think that's the key. So whatever sort of final single metric people decide to use is probably going to change per brand, by the way. When we work with folks like Unilever or Nestle or Anheuser-Busch, they ask different questions about what success means. Success for telling a story about Bud Light is actually different than success for telling a story about Stella, even though they're part of the same company. And so using different metrics ultimately become, I think, the brand's decision on how they optimize what they do in media. But I think when we get to the point where we can at least accept that it starts with time and attention, we're asking better questions, which will help people get to the right place.
Sure. I think the quest for just viewability and making sure we don't have robot traffic and we actually have consumers above the page, as it were, is the very early wave of educating the market, both buy and sell, how to actually package up something that's actually more meaningful to a brand advertiser. But if I look at the Moat dashboard, there's a whole set of variety of engagement data. And probably to Jonah's point, publishers and different brand advertisers will choose different parts of it. So right now, there's a whole array of data that they can say, well, that particular campaign is actually over-indexing on these types of criteria, or these particular publishers where I'm buying in market have actually got very low percentages or very high percentages. And I think that steers their media buy. These would be traders, steering the media buy to actually get that degree of scrolling or that degree of engagement.
Sure. Well, talking about the media buyers, to a conversation we had off stage about this and how we've got here. Has it been the industry's obsession with performance, and arbitrage is one of the ones we used? Who do you think, obviously you've talked about the buy side, the sell side, and then there's the guys in the middle, who process all of the traffic. Do you think it's the media agencies and the trading desks that really have to change how they do things?
Well, I think
so we can go away from this obsession with performance.
In programmatic, performance trading was also an excuse to be non-transparent and essentially book in huge percentages of margin. And I think if we look at the search advertising industry, there's very small percentages of takeaway between the sort of media spend and then the sort of advertiser getting they want. In programmatic display, we've got this sort of fat percentage of margin, and it's in people's interest to protect that. I think as we go to more transparent trading models, that will actually steer towards more brand spend as well, because the brand advertiser will demand that degree of transparency.
So is it coming from the marketers themselves that we're going to change these metrics? Is it going to come from the buy side?
Well, I think my own
revenue?
view is we've got CMOs who are not suddenly hiring their own internal teams, but they're certainly selecting their partners with awareness that their first-party data is their core asset, and they really want to be close to understanding what that data is, and they want partners that can effectively media buy and do all a host of other things with their first-party data. So actually just handing it over to a trading desk and having obfuscation, just hidden and not really getting to grips with what is their data, I think will change that business model.
Yeah. And do you see much kind of response from the advertisers, the media agencies themselves, saying like, okay, all right, we'll change because they don't want to lose that contract which they may have had for 20 or 30 years? Do you actually see that happening, or are they trying to shift the goalposts again just to try and protect that margin?
I think in a narrow field of programmatic display, there's inherent self-interest, but I think as CMOs are demanding, as Corey said, it's a very diverse array of advertising that's being run, and I think transparent agency models are on the increase.
Mm-hmm. Okay. John, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I guess I would just say that I think this change is being led by marketers and publishers. I think marketers want to effectively measure digital. They want to know what return they're getting on investing in digital. They're putting hundreds of millions, in some cases $1 billion+ into digital, and they have to justify that spend in order to continue getting it, in order to actually increase spend over time. And so I think marketers are asking the right questions. I think publishers, by the way, have been hurt by this shift towards audience is the only thing that matters. And publishers have begun to push back to say, wait a minute, it's not just about who the person is. Context matters. When they get engaged with the content matters. How they engage with it, how we present an ad to them matters. And so publishers are saying, wait a minute, I want to actually sell on something better than clicks and audience as well. And so I think publishers are asking questions about attention and asking questions about how to move the needle for brand marketers. So I actually think both of those sides are coming together. On the agency question, 3 years ago, I didn't hear a single agency talking about viewability. Now I don't hear a single agency not talking about viewability. So I would say the agencies move either because they have foresight or because they move as a reaction to their clients. But nonetheless, I do think that they move.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you just mentioned viewability, and earlier on you mentioned about click frauds, and how about we go to like the hot topic at the moment? It just wouldn't be a conference without a panel kind of talking about it. Ad blocking. How much is that ushering this in? How much is consumer reaction actually forcing this change within the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my 2 cents is I don't think consumers are blocking ads per se. I think consumers are blocking bad experiences. And I think those experiences happen to have a strong correlation to some of the ads that are on the page. I don't think consumers actually dislike ads. I think if you think about most of the brands that everyone in this room knows, think about Nike or Coke or Rolex or IBM or anything. How do you know about these brands? Some of them you've had direct experience with. A lot of it is because we've been advertised to over, as somebody said earlier in the day, repetitive, I'll add, positive interactions. And so in the end of the day, I actually think that consumers like advertising, not in the sense that you raise your hand and say, please advertise to me, but it's part of our culture. And it's been that way for a very long time. And so I think ad blocking is really about the user experience, not about ads. The minute you understand that, we can ask better questions. Well, what's wrong with the user experience? A lot. It takes too long to load. Like John said, when you're focused on a task and you can't do it, it's really annoying. Great. So how do we solve for the issues around the user experience and focus on that? And I think the ad piece can come with it. So this idea that, native ads won't really be affected by ad blocking because they're different and much better. I think that's not the right conversation. I think the right conversation is, let's fix latency, let's fix load times, let's fix design of user experiences, and ads can certainly be a part of that. And then let's shift the conversation back to effectiveness. By the way, ad blocking we see is 10 to 15% of volume for premium publishers. It's not 50%, it's not going on 70%. And somebody said, even with the Apple example, the largest downloaded app in iOS is Google Maps. And Google Maps is something like 1/3 of all iOS users. So that's the biggest one that doesn't come with the operating system, is Google Maps, and that's 1/3, 1/3, 33%. So I think there's somewhat of a ceiling on what we get to, even with the most favorite apps that people have.
Okay. I personally feel ad blocking is there because of sort of data costs of the payload and the like, but I do think the cyber stalking is a genuine spookiness that a lot of people might talk about. Friends and family have probably talked to you because they know you're in the advertising sector, and they've talked about the fact that they're being chased around for products they bought a few weeks back, and they kind of feel that it's an intrusion. So clearly, with a background of Grape Shot, I'd say context really does matter, but also over time you should know that I just don't like golf. I mean, so why interest me with a hobby like golf when my hobby is actually kite surfing? Anything to do with my hobby, I will just consume. It's a service. It's actually, it's almost advertorial. It's delighting me. And I think we've got to get to the stage where either the consumer is properly profiled in a sort of Corey-like way of everything joined up, or essentially I, the consumer, actually have a say. So where's the ad blocker of the future where I say, look, this is actually partly my demographic if I want to reveal it, but I don't want sort of certain, dresses, or I don't want to have golf, but I really want to have kite surfing. Why don't I control it? I might control it in my news alert service, so why don't I control it in my sort of marketing alert? Especially where I think in a more mobile world, we'll have coupons and we'll have lots of economic incentives to participate in probably quite location-aware offers.
Okay.
And I think that there the consumer will have, I think, a richer experience, and will actually want those offers and not to block all the ads.
Did you say you're being retargeted with dresses?
Is that a shared family computer?
Perhaps I share my mobile with someone.
Okay, well, I can see we're coming towards the end of our allotted time. I was just wondering if we've got any questions from the crowd. Anybody? I don't know if there's a mic going around.
Keep talking, Jonah. I think y'all did a great job. One question, nobody ever holds accountable. What about the creatives? What's their stake in this? Nobody ever talks about, oh my gosh, did you see that right placement? They talk about that right ad, that right Super Bowl ad. When are creatives going to be held accountable for the suck stuff they put out?
So when we were talking about the quest for the perfect impression, there were 3 people around the table. And the other person is a customer of both of our companies, and he really focuses on that creative impression. It's a mobile ad network with premium publishers, Harry from Cargo, and he's like, it really is about that engagement in the right context, but it's the quality of that creative that's part of the storytelling. So it was actually those 3 legs to the same stool for the quest for the perfect impression.
I would just add, I don't think it's that creative is not held accountable. I just think that creative doesn't necessarily get the same feedback that the media side gets. Creative doesn't tend to get metrics around the effectiveness of each ad and even the landscape or the opportunity that they're going to have to engage people. And so I think part of it is about bringing creative and media together and having them be part of the same conversation. Today, the sort of status quo is that creative hands off to media, media takes it, thank you very much, and goes and places it where they place it. And for the most part, creative has no idea where the ads are even going to run. And so I think we have to actually go back, bring those 2 sides together, and share the same data set with both sides, and we can actually have, I wouldn't phrase it as accountability, but I would phrase it as we can both work towards the same goal. And I think creatives would love to be part of that process, but they tend not to be at these conferences.
To your point as well, I'm just recounting a conversation I had last week with some members of ISBA, which is the trade body for brand side marketeers over in the UK. And they had a big town hall meeting last week about the dynamic creative ad serving, and apparently like everybody was just really, excuse my language, pissed about it. They were not happy at all with their creative agencies, and they actually said more than viewability, click fraud, or ad blocking, that this is the one thing we're really going to hammer their creative agencies or their agency roster on, was exactly the ability to do that.
Sort of had the Pepsi CMO at the ANA last week began alluding to that challenge. It's probably the first time that I saw something in any kind of press that sort of raise that in the U.S.? I still think it's an interesting question, and I thought your idea in the next 5 years, because they're not in conferences. Nobody ever asked the ECD, who produces great video for television, to be at one of these to say, what can you do to be better? I don't want to, any questions anybody has? This is a great topic, and both are great companies. Any perspectives, questions?